A name is one of the simplest things we carry, yet it's one of the most powerful. It's a kind of code compact, almost deceptively small, but capable of holding entire lifetimes inside it. A name tells you where someone has been, what shaped them, and often even what the world expected of them before they ever had a chance to decide for themselves. When you say someone's name out loud, you are acknowledging their existence, their presence, their story. You're saying, in essence, I see you. And for many people, especially those who have spent years unheard or overlooked, that recognition can be everything. We underestimate names because we treat them like labels, when in reality they function more like launchpads. Every major achievement, every moment of innovation, every act of courage starts with someone daring to step forward and say, "This is who I am." Think about that. Before any accomplishment, any breakthrough, any transformation, there is an introduction, a declaration, a name placed into the world with intention. Revealing one's name isn't a small act. It's the first bold step in saying, I matter, my voice matters, my story matters. And that step can change the entire trajectory of a life. But the power behind a name isn't just in its sound or its letters. It's in the responsibility we attach to it. It's in the way we carry it when no one's watching. It's the decisions we make, the risks we take, the failures we learn from, and the resilience we build. A name becomes stronger as we do. It becomes something people associate with courage, creativity, persistence, or impact. And that evolution happens regardless of where we start. Some names begin in privilege, others begin in obscurity or hardship. What makes a name powerful isn't the circumstance, it's the journey. That's why revealing a name, truly revealing it, is an act of strength. It's choosing to step out of anonymity and into accountability. It's choosing to say, I'm here, and I'm willing to be known for what I build, what I stand for, and what I refuse to back down from. When someone finally speaks their name, after years of staying quiet, it means they've reached a point where staying hidden costs more than stepping forward. It means they've found a reason, or a mission, or a sense of self that's bigger than their fear. Names also carry momentum. Once your name is out there, attached to something that matters, it doesn't just sit still. It travels. It grows. Other people repeat it. They connect it to outcomes and ideas and emotions. Sometimes they misunderstand it. Sometimes they challenge it. But they engage with it, and that means you've entered the arena. And entering the arena is the only way anything meaningful ever gets built. And here's the thing. A name doesn't have to be widely recognized to be powerful. It just has to be claimed. Even if only one person hears your name today, and that one person is you, spoken in a moment where you finally choose your direction, that is enough. You don't need fame for your name to carry weight. You need clarity. You need purpose. You need a willingness to stand behind the story you're creating, even when the results aren't visible yet. When her name is revealed, when anyone's name is revealed, it marks the beginning of possibility. It's a shift from silence to presence, from uncertainty to intention. It's the moment where you stop waiting for permission and begin taking ownership of your narrative. And once that happens, once a name is spoken with conviction, it becomes very hard to ignore. Because a name, when aligned with purpose, becomes more than identity. It becomes a catalyst. And when a catalyst enters the world, everything around it begins to move. Silence is rarely empty. Most of the time, it's full of the things people are afraid to say, the truths they're not ready to face, the dreams they think they don't deserve to chase. And for her, the silence that hid her story wasn't just the absence of sound. It was a protective shell she built around herself, piece by piece, often without even realizing it. Silence can feel safe, especially when the world hasn't yet proven that it knows how to listen. But safety and growth don't always live in the same place, and she learned that the hard way. There are countless reasons people stay silent. Sometimes it's fear of judgment, of failure, of being misunderstood. Sometimes it's the weight of expectations, those invisible forces that tell you who you're allowed to be and who you're not. Other times, it's the simple fact that no one ever asked. No one ever paused long enough to say, "Tell me your story." And when no one asks, you start to assume your story doesn't matter. That maybe it's not remarkable enough, or loud enough, or important enough to take up space. Silence becomes a habit, a routine, almost a default setting. For her, The silence started as a defense mechanism. When you grow up in environments where speaking your truth gets you dismissed or punished, you learn quickly that quiet is safer than honesty. You learn to shrink yourself to fit the room. You learn to hold your ideas like fragile prototypes, never tested, never released. Because testing means risk, and risk means exposure. And exposure, when you're not ready, feels like standing in a storm with no shield. But what she didn't realize was that silence, while protective, also limits potential. It keeps you from building the connections you need, the collaborations that spark innovation, the opportunities that only appear when you're visible. Silence can shield you, but it can also isolate you. And isolation, over time, starts to feel like invisibility. She began to understand that the more she withheld her name, her voice, her perspective, the more she was unintentionally agreeing to stay unseen. There's also the silence created by other people, silence imposed rather than chosen. The kind that comes from systems built to overlook certain voices, cultures that undervalue certain identities, or environments that reward compliance over creativity. People can get trapped in those systems for years without realizing the impact. They start to internalize the idea that their contributions aren't wanted, their insights aren't relevant, their presence isn't essential. But the truth is, the world doesn't progress by muting diversity, it progresses by embracing it. The silence that hid her story didn't just hide her from the world, it hid the world from what she could contribute. And that's the part that often goes unnoticed. When someone's voice is missing, whether by choice or by constraint, the world loses something too, an idea, a solution, a perspective, a spark. Innovation doesn't thrive on sameness. It thrives on the collision of different minds, different histories, different imaginations. Her silence meant those collisions never had a chance to happen. Eventually, though, something shifted. Silence, even when comfortable, eventually becomes too tight. It stops feeling like protection and starts feeling like confinement. She reached a point where staying quiet required more energy than speaking up, a point where the cost of hiding outweighed the risk of being known. And that's when she realized that the silence surrounding her story wasn't a permanent condition, it was a barrier she could break. That moment matters, because when someone steps out of silence, even tentatively, the entire ecosystem around them changes. People pay attention, they adapt, they recalibrate. The silence that once hid her story begins to dissolve, replaced by possibility, connection, and momentum. She understood that the world cannot benefit from what it cannot hear, and she decided her voice was worth hearing. And so, the era of her silence ended not because she was no longer afraid, but because she finally understood that fear should never have the final say. Her story was never meant to stay hidden, it was meant to ignite. The journey to claiming her identity didn't happen all at once. It didn't arrive in a dramatic moment with lights flashing and music swelling like some cinematic breakthrough. It was slower, messier, more human than that. It began quietly, in the small moments where she started questioning the version of herself she had been performing for years. It began when she looked at the life around her and wondered, is this really mine, or did I just learn to fit into it? That question alone can be a turning point. Because once you start to question the narrative you've accepted, you begin rewriting it, whether you intend to or not. For a long time she thought identity was something handed to her by circumstance, by tradition, by expectation. She thought it was something fixed, like a label you were assigned at birth and told to carry without adjustment. But identity is more like a blueprint, an initial framework that you can keep modifying as you evolve. And evolution was exactly what she needed. She just didn't know how to begin. Most people don't. There's no manual for becoming yourself. There's no checklist or tutorial. You learn by moving, by experimenting, by failing, by recalibrating. You learn the same way rockets do, through iterative testing. Her first attempts at stepping into her real identity were clumsy. She tried using her voice in spaces where she had previously stayed silent, and it felt uncomfortable, like she was wearing a suit tailored for someone else. She tried sharing ideas she had kept hidden for years, and sometimes they were dismissed, sometimes misunderstood, sometimes ignored entirely. And that kind of feedback can make anyone retreat. It can make you think, maybe my silence was safer, maybe I'm not ready. But she kept going, because a part of her knew that discomfort is just a sign that you're stepping into new territory. And new territory is where growth happens. The more she moved forward, the more she realized that claiming her identity wasn't about becoming someone new, It was about removing everything she had layered on top of herself just to survive. She started peeling back those layers, the doubts she had inherited from others, the roles she had played to keep the peace, the versions of herself she had crafted to be acceptable rather than authentic. Every layer she shed brought her closer to the name she had been afraid to reveal. Every step made her less invisible, not just to the world, but to herself. But this journey wasn't solitary. Along the way, she encountered people who recognized something in her even before she recognized it fully in herself. People who saw potential where she saw uncertainty. People who challenged her to think bigger, speak louder, dream wider. Encouragement like that is powerful, not because it hands you confidence, but because it reflects the confidence you already have but haven't accessed yet. Support doesn't create identity, it amplifies it. Of course, not everyone supported her transformation. Some resisted it. Some questioned it. Some preferred the quieter version of her because it was easier for them. And facing that resistance was harder than she expected. But she learned something crucial. Chasing approval is the fastest way to abandon yourself. Staying aligned with who you are, even when it disrupts other people's comfort, is the only path that leads anywhere worth going. Eventually, her journey reached a point where she could feel the shift happening internally. She noticed she didn't shrink in conversations anymore. She didn't apologize for taking up space. She didn't default to silence when she had something worth saying. The name she had once tucked away started to feel less like a secret and more like a foundation, a grounding force she could build on. She wasn't hiding behind versions of herself. She was stepping into the only one that had ever truly belonged to her. Claiming her identity wasn't a destination she arrived at. It was a recognition she grew into. A realization that the story she had once protected in silence was never too small, too fragile, or too insignificant. It was powerful, it was necessary, and it was hers. And when she finally embraced that truth, her identity stopped being a question and became a declaration. There's a moment in every transformation when something shifts not gradually, not subtly, but decisively. A moment where the internal work that's been happening quietly beneath the surface finally rises up and demands to be seen. For her, that moment came when she realized she could no longer live in the space between who she was and who she was becoming. She had spent years preparing, reshaping, questioning, and building the foundation of her identity. But there comes a time when preparation has to give way to launch. And the launch begins the second you decide to reveal your name, to stand in your truth fully, without hedging, without shrinking, without apologizing. That moment didn't arrive with fanfare. It rarely does. It came on an ordinary day, in an ordinary room, during an ordinary conversation. But something in her was no longer willing to be ordinary. She was tired of folding parts of herself to fit situations that were never built for her. She was tired of being cautious, tired of being quiet, tired of waiting for a sign or permission or the perfect timing. She understood that the perfect moment to reveal your name doesn't exist. You create it by choosing to step forward. So she did. And what's interesting is that the act itself was incredibly simple. She spoke. She stated who she was. Not the edited version, not the diluted one, not the version shaped to satisfy expectations. She spoke her real name, attached to her real identity, backed by the truth she had spent years uncovering. But simplicity doesn't mean insignificance. That one act, that one sentence, carried the weight of her entire journey. It was the culmination of every doubt she pushed through, every fear she challenged, every boundary she broke. It wasn't just a name being spoken, it was a life being claimed. The room reacted the way the world often does when it encounters someone stepping into their power. There was a pause, a recalibration. People who had grown used to her silence suddenly had to adjust to her presence. It wasn't dramatic, but it was noticeable. And in that pause, she felt something shift inside her, something that felt like alignment. She wasn't hiding anymore. She wasn't negotiating with her own identity. She wasn't splitting herself into versions. She felt whole, and wholeness is unmistakable. What she didn't expect was how freeing the moment would feel. She had always imagined revealing her name would be terrifying, that she'd feel exposed or vulnerable. But instead, she felt something else. She felt released. It was as if every piece of her that had been waiting for this moment finally snapped into place. She felt lighter, clearer, more grounded. The world didn't suddenly change, but her place in it did. And when your internal world shifts, your external world inevitably follows. Some people in that moment understood the significance immediately. Others didn't. But that didn't matter. The revelation wasn't for them. It was for her. And once her name was out there, unfiltered, unmasked, it gained momentum. It began shaping conversations differently. It changed the way she walked into rooms, the way she contributed, the way she built relationships and opportunities. A name revealed is not just a declaration, it's an invitation to be seen, to be heard, to be known. What made the moment powerful wasn't the volume of her voice, but the certainty behind it. She wasn't guessing. She wasn't hoping. She was choosing. And choosing yourself fully, unapologetically, is one of the rarest and most transformative decisions a person can make. Because once you choose yourself, the world has no choice but to adjust. And that's the beauty of the moment her name was revealed. It marked the end of hiding and the beginning of becoming. It transformed silence into presence, potential into purpose, identity into impact. From that moment forward, she no longer introduced herself to the world, she aligned with it. And alignment is the first step toward greatness. When her name finally entered the world, clearly, confidently, without hesitation, it didn't just change her, it changed the atmosphere around her. People underestimate how much one person's courage can recalibrate an entire environment. We tend to think identity is personal, almost private, something that stays contained within the person who claims it. But that's not how it works. When someone steps into who they truly are, it sends ripples outward, affecting everyone who crosses their path. Her revelation had that effect. It acted like a signal, subtle yet undeniable, that things were shifting, that the old dynamics were no longer the default, that something new had entered the equation. The people closest to her felt it first. Some of them were genuinely inspired. They saw her stepping forward in a way she never had before, and it forced them to reflect on the ways they'd been holding themselves back. Courage is contagious. It challenges complacency. Suddenly, the conversations around her grew deeper, more honest. People started sharing their own stories, their own fears, their own versions of the silence they had been living in. Her transformation gave others permission to examine their own, not because she asked them to, but because authenticity has a way of raising the bar for everyone in the room. Others were surprised pleasantly or otherwise. When someone changes the role they've played for years, it can unsettle people who relied on that version of them. She had been quiet for so long that her voice felt like a disruption. But disruption isn't inherently negative. Disruption is what forces systems, relationships, and expectations to evolve. And once she revealed her name, once she showed up as herself rather than the filtered version, the people around her had a choice: evolve with her or remain behind. Some stepped up, others hesitated. A few resisted. That resistance taught her something important. Not everyone benefits from your silence, but some people prefer it. Still, even that resistance had an impact. It showed her where alignment existed and where it didn't. It clarified which relationships were built on genuine connection and which were built on convenience. And clarity, though sometimes uncomfortable, is always valuable. It allowed her to make decisions rooted in truth rather than obligation. It allowed her to step into spaces where her voice was welcomed rather than tolerated. Beyond her immediate circle, the impact expanded even further. Her colleagues noticed shifts in her work, not just in output, but in leadership, in initiative, in the way she contributed ideas she once would have kept to herself. People began to see that she wasn't just participating, she was shaping. And once someone starts shaping their environment, they become impossible to overlook. Her name, once hidden, started showing up in conversations, in decisions, in opportunities. It became associated with solutions rather than silence. That's what happens when identity meets action. It becomes influence. And influence isn't always loud. Sometimes it's the quiet inspiration someone feels when watching a person step boldly into their truth. Sometimes it's the motivation someone gets from witnessing a transformation they once thought impossible. Her revelation became proof that change doesn't have to be perfect to be powerful. It just has to be real. People around her began taking more risks. They started challenging norms they had previously accepted without question. They started asking themselves what parts of their identity they had been suppressing and why. One person's breakthrough can become the blueprint for someone else's. That's the hidden power of authenticity. It creates a pathway, not by force, but by example. And eventually, her influence reached a point where it wasn't just about inspiration anymore, it was about impact. tangible impact. Projects gained momentum because she wasn't afraid to lead. Teams innovated more boldly because she modeled boldness. Decisions improved because she added perspectives that had been missing. When a previously quiet voice becomes active, entire systems expand. They gain dimension, they gain depth, they gain balance. What she revealed that day wasn't just her name. It was the truth that identity, once claimed, doesn't stop at the individual, it expands into every space they move through. And that expansion has the power to change everything. There comes a point, in every story like hers, where the focus shifts outward. Once a name is revealed, once a voice long held in silence finally rises, something becomes clear. She was never the only one. There are countless others still waiting, still weighing the cost of stepping forward, still carrying identities they've kept tucked away because the world has not yet proven it will honor them. And that realization brings a responsibility, one that belongs not only to her, but to all of us. Because progress doesn't happen when one person finds their voice. It happens when we create an environment where many voices feel safe to be heard. The truth is, the world is full of unspoken names. People walking through life unseen, underestimated, or unheard. People whose experiences have taught them to shrink rather than rise. People whose stories remain locked away because no one has ever shown them what happens when a story is set free. It's easy to celebrate the bold, the loud, the confident, but the real measure of any community, any organization, any society, is how it treats the ones who are still gathering the courage to speak. Honoring unspoken names doesn't mean dragging people into the spotlight before they're ready. It means building a world where, when they are ready, they won't hesitate. A world that doesn't reward silence or punish authenticity. A world that recognizes that talent, brilliance, and insight aren't always packaged in the loudest delivery, but they are always worth hearing. And that begins with how we listen. Listening isn't passive. It's intentional. It's choosing to make space. Choosing to slow down enough to notice the person who's been holding back. Choosing to encourage someone who's been conditioned to believe their voice isn't valuable. It means asking questions that go deeper than the surface. It means inviting participation rather than assuming disinterest. It means being the kind of presence that makes others feel their contributions matter even before they've spoken them aloud. Her story is a reminder that silence rarely comes from emptiness. It comes from environments that haven't yet proven themselves trustworthy. So if we want more people to reveal their names, their identities, their ideas, then creating trust isn't optional, it's foundational. That trust is built through consistency, through empathy, through showing, not just saying, that everyone has a place in the conversation. And when we honor unspoken names, we open the door to possibilities we can't even predict. Innovation thrives when people bring their full selves to the table. Breakthroughs happen when diverse perspectives collide. Progress accelerates when people feel they have ownership in shaping the future rather than just observing it. Every unspoken name represents potential, not in theory, but in reality. Potential inventions, potential solutions, potential collaborations, potential leaders. The more voices we include, the more exponential our growth becomes. But honoring unspoken names also means challenging the systems that keep those names hidden. It means acknowledging the biases, the structures, the traditions that have historically favored certain voices while sidelining others. It means not being defensive about those realities, but rather being proactive in reshaping them. We cannot evolve as a society if we cling to old frameworks that reward conformity over contribution. Her name was once hidden, but now it stands as a reminder, almost like a beacon, that every person deserves the chance to take up space without apology. And if her revelation taught us anything, it's that courage often starts with one, but it never ends with one. Courage spreads, it inspires, it multiplies. So the call now is simple, but powerful. Look around you. Notice the people whose brilliance isn't being tapped yet. Notice the ones who hesitate before speaking.